Hi, this is Bill, and this is going to be my long-term review of the Turnigy DB. I've been racing this at my local club now for about almost 2 months now, and this is actually not the original body that came with the car. I just went ahead and bought a replacement body just for this long-term review. But I will share with you some insights and tips and things that I've learned along the way in owning this car. Just to quickly summarize, I am happy with this car overall, and I do plan to continue racing it long term. This is not a car that is going to be ready to race right out of the box. It will require for you to make some tweaks and adjustments here and there. Nothing terribly expensive, and I'm going to go in great detail here shortly. Be sure to click the link on the description of this video for more detail and information about this review, filled with pictures and links to other videos related to this Turnigy. The stock tires that come with this Turnigy are excellent basher tires. They're a really hard compound, and they don't give too much gription on concrete, so you don't really have a tendency for the car to flip and roll over making sharp turns. It has a tendency to do a power slide on asphalt, and the tires, I believe, will last a fair amount of time. Not to mention they're relatively inexpensive. I do recommend, if you are going to do a lot of bashing on the street, probably going to be a good idea to go ahead and order an extra set of wheels and tires when you purchase the car. The wheels are not the best racing wheels. For bashing, not a problem, but if you're going to be racing and you want a consistent feel when you're going over jumps, it's probably not a good idea to use the stock wheels and tires. You may want to go ahead and upgrade to a good set of racing wheels and tires. Same thing with the suspension. I'll go over shortly here on the suspension some of the adjustments that need to be made. This is the stock suspension here, and no additional upgrades other than refilling the shock fluid, but they're decent. The stock power system in this, the 3300 kilovolt motor, is pretty decent. It's relatively comparable to the tack-on 3200 kilovolt motor. The 35 amp ESC is very much acceptable. The temperature ranges are very acceptable to me, and I have no problems running the stock setup with a 2-cell LiPo. I've used various 2-cell LiPos ranging all the way up to 65C and 6,000 milliamps, and this thing has been able to get up to 33 miles per hour. So very happy overall with the stock electronics. I would not recommend upgrading to a 3-cell LiPo. As tempting as it may be, you might risk blowing out the speed control. So I would recommend sticking just with the 2-cell LiPo on it. One thing you want to watch out for is right here in the body where the turnbuckle comes into the steering arm and servo. It actually rubs. You see how the body kind of moves there? So you want to trim the front of the body, little piece of there, so that way it doesn't bind on your steering linkage control. Now another thing I've done is I've drilled a couple of holes, 1/16 inch diameter holes on each of the parts where the top of the roof mount to the tube frame of the chassis, and I put pins, or little body clip pins in here to hold it in place. The problem that I was experiencing when the car was being turn marshaled is turn marshals like to grab the roll cage, and there is no good way for this roll cage to be fastened to the thing, because these little clips on the back just snap right off. And the whole body was actually coming off the car when the car was being turn marshaled. So this is my solution to fix that. I might actually consider that a design flaw, and also the same design flaw exists on the Kyosho as well. So if you guys are getting your cars turn marshaled and you're having that problem, go ahead and give this a try. Okay, I'm going to be demonstrating how I'm going to resolve the suspension design flaw in the Turnigy DB. And what I've done here is I've taken the ball cup off of my suspension pin, and you can see how there's a bunch of wasted space here where the threads stop at about 3 millimeters into the ball cup. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and mark with a pen right on the tip here, and then cut off this section right here where the threads go in and meet here to the top here. So this part of the plastic will be removed, and that should be able to allow the car to bottom out properly. Now I just made my cut here so you can see how much plastic is actually removed, and now go ahead and install this and see what it looks like next. Okay, I just finished rebuilding the shock on the right, and it gets full flex all the way down to the bottom. It gets full compression using the original parts. Another thing that I just finished doing was I went ahead and disassembled the shock, and I bored out the hole in the piston. The piston holes were tiny little pinholes, and this shock over here on the left I'll demonstrate. This is the stock shock fluid, and you'll see how it moves real slow, and then I'll let go with my thumb. You'll see how slow it is to react when it comes out, and that's because the piston holes are way too small. I used a 1/16 drill bit, which is kind of big, but this is what it is now. It's much smoother action on the shock with those pistons. So this is using 30 weight oil, and it just feels much normal now, like a regular shock should. Another thing that I noticed while I was working on boring out these piston holes, so you can see here, this is I'm trying to get in as close as I can. You can see that I just bored it out with a 1/16 inch hole, and let's try to get this to focus a little. Not going to cooperate. But anyway, those are the bored out piston holes there. This shock tube is just like the Kyosho design, where if you look deep down inside there, you'll see a star-shaped washer, and that washer is what is used to lock in the O-rings for the shock cartridge. So at the bottom of the tube here, as the piston and the rod moves up and down, those little O-rings down here in this hole are held in place with that little lock washer. What has a tendency to happen is that lock washer will loosen up over time and slide up the shock tube. As that slides up the shock tube, then the shock oil will leak out and dump out through the bottom of the hole. The best way to make sure that is seated properly is using this little plastic tool. And then if you follow the link on this video, you'll see a bunch of other close-up pictures and other links to where to get this tool from. But this tool is used to go inside the shock tube and pushes out through the hole here, and then the flat spot on here will push that lock washer and lock it in place. And this is a very valuable tool to have for shock maintenance. Okay, I just finished rebuilding the shocks after boring out the pistons with 1/16 millimeter holes and refilling with 30 weight associated fluid. I've also shortened the ball cups using the original parts, so everything on here is all original shock parts. And now I'm going to go ahead and do my suspension test to make sure that it bottoms out, and it does. So we're getting good flow there. It's a much smoother shock now, much more natural feeling than it came out of the box. Same thing on the rear. We'll go ahead and check the rear, and it's really close, but we're bottoming out the way we should with the cut, and much better feel on the suspension. It doesn't feel really tight like it did before, and I think that really has to do with the fact that those pistons were the holes in the original pistons were far too small. So I think this is going to be a much better setup with some minor modifications. So the bottom line on this car, if you are looking for a basher, I definitely would recommend it. Parts are cheap, inexpensive, fairly readily available, either through Hobby King, and there are a handful of parts that are compatible with Kyosho, and such as the suspension arms, shocks, and larger parts, but the drivetrain components, not all of them will be compatible, such as the gearbox is not compatible, the rear chassis plate, and some of those types of parts are not going to be compatible, but could be changed out, or modifications could be made to the Kyosho part to make it work with the Turnigy. So depending on what you're breaking, go ahead and look at my on my online links, and I'll explain in detail which parts are and are not compatible. But other than that, for a basher, excellent car. For a racer, you're probably going to have to make some upgrades here and there. The amount of money that you're going to spend in upgrades to make this car very race-worthy and durable for the long haul, you probably might end up spending more money on this car than you will some of the other SCVs out there. So for racing, it's a very good racer, but you do prepare yourself to spend a fair amount of money to get it durable on the track.